So you want to build a setting of your very own, whether it's for D&D, some other tabletop RPG, or even for a novel or a screenplay. But where do you start? How do you keep from getting bogged down in the details? How detailed do you need to be? Do you start big or start small? Do you work your way in or work your way out? These are all valid questions. I'm Cameron Holtz, and today on Fantasy Forge, I'm going to help you with the tools that you need to build a world of your own, hopefully without getting too flustered. Like I am. I'm going to go ahead and apologize up top in advance. If you hear any strange noises, I'm filming this in an apartment, and I don't have any control. But hey, if you subscribe, maybe one day I'll have a studio. For this video series, I'll be focusing mostly on D&D, but the ideas that I'll be touching on can be applied elsewhere as well. Whether you're a long-time DM running from modules and source books, or a first-timer who's creating your first campaign after being inspired by watching fantastic live play shows like Critical Role or Dimension 20, The Adventure Zone, or other fantastic shows. You can do this, and in this series I'm going to show you how. We're going to walk through the creation of a setting from start to finish, from inception and idea to running your first session. So, without further ado, let's talk about some of the things that we're going to cover in this series. So where do you start? Every world begins with an idea. I typically like to start with the genre, because genre and setting are things that kind of go hand in hand. For example, you wouldn't typically see a dark, gritty, bloody story that takes place in a colorful, vibrant world full of people and things made of food and candy. However, that alone can create a compelling world and a compelling narrative, as it does in Dimension 20's Crown of Candy. If you can't tell, I'm a fan. Stay pretty general and broad at first. It's easier to not tie yourself down into little details. At first, you just kind of want to get a broad sense of things. Is your world high fantasy in a medieval setting? Or is it a more modern day adventure in a contemporary city? Is magic very prevalent in your world, or is it a low magic setting? Maybe magic does exist, but it's been outlawed by the government. That alone starts a very compelling narrative for your adventure, especially if one or more of your players are playing a casting class. How do they keep it under wraps? Well, that's on them. These are the questions that I try to ask myself when I'm first fleshing out a new world. Don't be afraid to mix and match as well. Want to create a world with a 40s style noir feel, but that takes place in an 1800s London-style city where magic runs the world instead of machinery? You can do that. For this video series, we're going to stick with what's probably the most popular genre for a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, which is high fantasy. Once we've got that, we need to ask ourselves some more questions. Is this world ancient with a long history full of lore? Or is it new, with many lands that have still been unexplored? Are monsters common or uncommon? Do you find them in cities, or are they more on the outskirts in the wilderness? Are there gods in this world? Are they present and corruptible, or are they immense, omnipotent, and all-knowing? I know this seems like a lot, but don't worry, these are all things that we're going to touch on throughout the series. Slowly taking the big block of color and refining it down to a more and more detailed, finished product. Or finished enough. So for our purposes, we're making a high fantasy setting, akin to Lord of the Rings, the Dark Crystal, Aragon, something of that nature. But we'll put a little twist on it. We'll add in a bit of a Wild West vibe. New and lawless lands being settled and discovered, swollen with ancient ruins, bandit outlaws, and frontier justice among the magical landscape. We'll call our world Elegreet. Literally just the words elegant and grit smashed together with a little bit of a French twist to make it sound fancy. Nobody else needs to know that this is how we came to this conclusion if we don't want them to, but it can be a fun little bit of trivia if players are curious. If you want to, you can create your own pantheon of gods, but in the realms of D&D there are already so many to pick and choose from, and you don't have to stick to just one. You can go through and pick the ones that you think fit the best for your setting, whether it's polytheistic or monotheistic, if there's just one deity and one evil deity, like a god and a devil, or perhaps many gods and many devils. If creating your own pantheon is something that interests you, or if one of your players has forced your hand by playing a cleric or a paladin, there will be a video on this specific topic a little bit later in the series. What's next? We've got our idea for a fantastical spaghetti western of swords and sorcery. What now? The next step that I like to take is mapping out the world before zooming in to focus on more specific settlements or cities. There are a wealth of ways to create maps for your world, even if you're not an artist. There's a wonderful online tool called Incarnate that I'm personally a very big fan of, and prefer to use for most of my map making needs. For world maps in particular, they've got a great feature that allows you to just randomly generate landforms among an ocean, so that you don't even have to go in and draw the shapes yourself. And they're pretty nice. I should also say, I am not sponsored by this website, I am just a fan. There's a free version as well as a $5 paid subscription that you can use to get access to even more tools, but the free version should have everything that you need to get started. I'll cover this website as well as more methods of creating maps in a later video. Once I've mapped out a continent, I like to zoom way in and focus on a specific settlement for the start of my game or story. I would highly recommend starting small with a hamlet or a village, because it's less that you have to worry about, less NPCs that you have to come up with right off the bat, easier economic systems, and typically much easier to understand as far as local government. When you get more comfortable, there will always be an option for your players to explore and find a more bustling urban cityscape, but in the meantime, take it easy on your brain and start small. Is it a fishing village? Easy. They make their money from catching and selling fish. Need an adventure hook? All the fish in the lake have been dying and drying up. What's the cause? If only there were a small band of adventurers to investigate and save the town. Small farming town? Perhaps bandits have been intercepting shipments of wheat to a nearby city. Maybe if the carts were accompanied by a group of heroic vagrants. Who knows? Maybe it could keep the town from falling into ruin. A great resource for creating believable maps of villages, cities, towns, and other types of settlements is the Medieval Fantasy City Generator by Watabu, or Watabu? Unclear. It's spelled like this. You can randomly generate a city or town of 3 different size choices, and then go in and tweak and adjust things, move them down, change the names of regions, turn off region names if you're not worried about it, or like districts and things like that. Again, not sponsored, just a fan. We'll have our players start in a settlement called Imp Gulch, a small cattle town built around an oasis in a dry and arid desert region of Elegreet. I came up with this idea by doing some light Googling on the main exports of a Wild West town, and combining that with the fantasy setting of a desert oasis. Maybe the first settlers happened upon the oasis and decided to stop their journey here and settle down, away from the oppressive governments to the east. Now you've got some lore if any of the players make some history checks. The main thing is to keep it simple mechanically. Put more energy into describing the buildings and people and setting and things that the players are going to run into in the town, to make it really feel like a living, breathing world. My main goal with the setting is to make it feel like things will keep moving and progressing regardless of whether or not the players are interacting with things. However, their actions will have a major impact on the world around them. It helps to write out a little paragraph to read at the beginning of the first session to set the scene and give the players an idea of where they are and what they're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting. Try and touch on all the 5 senses. Here's how we'll start our first session in Elegreet. Tumbleweeds dance across the dry, cracked dirt road that leads through the center of town. A grizzled half-orc rancher herds his dire oxen towards the watering hole, with an iron scimitar dangling at his hip. A drunken half-elf is thrown out of the cracked Talon saloon, kicking up a puff of dust as he hits the road. The smell of cooked meats and stale alcohol drifts out from the saloon and accosts your senses. Welcome to Imp Gulch. This start gives us several hooks already, as well as a potential home base. The players can follow the dire ox rancher to the watering hole, question the drunken half-elf for his mumbled life story, or even head into the cracked Talon saloon for a drink or 4. It's also good to come up with a few side characters or NPCs that are prominent within the town, or that the characters will most likely run into. For example, Imp Gulch's lazy drunk of a sheriff, Waltus Green. He's the half-elf that was tossed out of the cracked Talon saloon and is on another one of his infamous benders. He's grown accustomed to the peaceful nature of the town and developed some bad habits, and as such, all of his deputies have quit and left town. That means he'll probably need some help when a roving band of outlaws ride in and decide to make this town their own personal playground. That wasn't my initial plan describing a drunk being tossed from the tavern, but there's also a train nearby. I'll wait. That wasn't my initial plan in describing a drunk being tossed from the saloon, but with the addition of a DC 12 perception check, the players might notice the glint of a sheriff's badge on the drunk. This adds some intrigue with the subversion of expectations as this drunkard ends up being the town sheriff, which shows the players more about the town's current situation than just dumping some lore on them. Show don't tell. It's an important step. We'll talk more about building interesting and compelling NPCs in the future, but there's a freebie. They're all free. You can subscribe to this channel for free. It doesn't cost you anything. From this starting point, you can expand out to larger cities, even different climates. Are you starting in an arid desert? Maybe a magical forest or a lush swamp? Think about what the borders between these areas look like. Is it a gradual change or a sudden stop from one to the other? Maybe a surge of wild magic caused a certain area to be the way that it is. Try and bake in these bits of lore and intrigue and history as you go. It gives you building blocks to work with as the story progresses and things to easily weave into the plot points of the game. Also, don't be afraid to take inspiration from film, books, TV, or other media if they have things in their setting that you enjoy. And don't be disheartened if your characters catch on. That building carved into the mountainside looks a lot like Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings. Don't be offended. Just say, yeah, that's the vibe I'm going for. Not everything has to or will be completely original, so don't sweat it. So there you have it. A beginning to the beginner's guide to world building. I hope this video was helpful to you and at the very least got the gears turning about any ideas that you might have for your own settings. If you have any questions about my process or about anything that I may have glossed over in this video, don't worry, leave a comment down below and I will be sure to touch on those things in the future videos of this series. In the next episode, I'm going to go more in depth about crafting a map for your world and the different tools and methods that you can use to do so. I'll create a map for Elegate in the process. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so that you know when the next video in the world building series is going to be released. In the meantime, you can tune in for D&D Pokemon fusions, speed painting, miniature crafting videos, D&D animatics, and more. I'll see all of you in the next episode. But until then, stay safe out there, adventurers.